Hello everyone, and welcome back to my special 6-week series, The Grown Woman's Guide to Life, where we are talking about all things navigating your 30s and just kind of adulthood generally with financial grace and ease. And while at TFD we are often talking about things not to buy or ways not to spend your money, today I want to talk about 13 things that I have purchased that have changed my life. Some are really big, super serious financial things. Some of them are small and frankly kind of silly, but all of them have truly impacted my life in one way or another and have allowed me to become a person who I think overall makes not only good money choices, but feels pretty contented with her life. The key here is to remember that my purchases are not going to be the exact same as yours, but I do think from time to time it's really healthy to look back on how we've spent our money and think of the things that have made the biggest differences and what we can learn from each of those purchases. And on that note, I'd love to hear some of your best purchases or life-changing purchases down in the comments below. And as with every episode in this series, this video is brought to you by Advisor. Now, I started working with a financial advisor several years ago, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in this video, but I knew that they were the perfect partner for this series because not only is finding a really good financial advisor truly a game changer for when you are looking to step up to that higher level in your financial planning and wealth building, but I'm also a huge believer in Advisor's transparent flat fee model, which means that their advisors work for you and not for commissions. No matter what they recommend, they get paid the same. So if you are ready to step up your financial planning game, both in investments and a 360 view of your money and life goals, check out Advisor at the link in our description. And if you use our link, you will get an exclusive $500 discount off of your first year. But anyway, on to my 13 purchases that have changed my life. Starting with number 1, simply put, my LLC for the financial diet. Now, I technically have 3 LLCs. I have the financial diet, I have one for all of my publishing stuff, and I have an old one that I used for all of my regular general interest freelance stuff back when I was making some of my money as a freelance writer. Now, this is not to say that the LLC in and of itself was the life-changing aspect, because to be fair, what really becomes life-changing about starting a small business or going freelance is the work that you put into it. But committing to the idea and setting up a proper legal and financial structure, that also meant opening a business bank account to keep my finances separate, opening a QuickBooks account to manage all of my expenses associated with the business. The LLC for the financial diet, which to be clear, we started a few months after I wrote the first blog post for TFD, and shout out to Hank Green, was actually opened with the money from a grant that we received from Hank and John. It gave a level of structure and commitment to the business that not only made me take it more seriously, but also ensured that if and when we would start earning money, which we did, it would be properly categorized from day one. Whenever we do our entrepreneur classes and boot camps, we always talk about making sure that you set up the proper legal and financial structure for a small business or solopreneurship at the beginning, because trust me, you will miss it when it's gone if you get far into the business operations and your finances are a complete mess with your personal ones. But I do also think that it is a mental commitment. And if you are not ready to go through the process of setting up your business, it's usually a good indicator that you're not quite ready to start investing in that business yet, whether financially or just in terms of the work you're putting into it, which is no big deal. It just means we maybe have to let it cook a little bit. And on a similar note, my second purchase is an investment account. Now, I want to be clear that an investment account, I just opened one using a robo-advisor. It's not technically a purchase in the way we think of a purchase. It's not like I exchanged money for the account. The account in this case is really just a fund, a bucket that holds a bunch of different investments. But making the decision to open up an investment account, and for context, this was before TFD had a 401k. Now I also have my employer-backed retirement account. It was the first time I'd ever done something for my money that felt like it was beyond just getting by. It had taken so long to do things like get out of credit card debt, pay off my collections, start working on my credit score, and build up an emergency fund that it felt at the beginning of my financial journey like I would never actually be doing anything proactive with my money, that it would all just be damage control. So the day that I opened up my first investment account felt like the day that I was actually finally investing in myself. And since then, between my husband and I, we have several different investment accounts. And like I said, I do have a 401k through TFD, but that very first one still is very special to me, even though at the beginning I could barely afford to put any money in it, because it represented the potential of something beyond just survival mode, which had been the framework I was existing in for my entire financial life to that point. Now, on the less strictly financial/professional front, I have number 3, which is Mona. Now, Mona, my dog, who's currently taking a nap in the other room, and we're not going to bother a queen while she's sleeping, was not a purchase in the sense that I didn't get her from a breeder or, God forbid, a puppy mill. She is indeed an adopted dog. Her mom accidentally got pregnant out in Queens, which many such cases. But we have put a lot of money into her over the years just in the care and keeping of Mona. She's 10 years old as of October, which means that over the years we've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on this little tiny being. Now, I could go on forever about the ways in which a dog has really changed my life. Now, I always grew up having dogs, so I was just very used to the concept. But interestingly enough, I always had dogs in the context of living in a home with a yard. So I was just always used to, you just let your dog run around and they pretty much just live in the confines of your home and property. But here in New York City, you have to take your dog outside on a regular basis. You go to parks, you go on walks together. They don't have a yard you can just open up the door and let them run into. So kind of by default, dogs really give such a level of structure to your life, which in my mid-20s when we got her was something I desperately needed, but also really gave me the feeling that I could care for something, be responsible for something. And since then, we have traveled the world with her, we've been through some health scares with her, and we have just generally gotten so much love and joy and meaning out of having her in our life. Now, I can only speak to owning dogs. I can't speak to cats or birds or reptiles or any of the other pets that we own, although I know all of them can be very meaningful and life-changing. But I can say if you are someone who has been considering or debating getting a dog, first of all, I would look into fostering as a first step, because I think that not only is it a good way to understand how a dog could fit into your life, it's also a really important thing to do for dogs who are in need of adoption. But I would also say dogs, especially again in a city where you have to be very proactive in how you take care of them, a good question to ask yourself is, am I looking for a higher level of accountability in my life? And do I feel prepared to offer that accountability? Because ultimately, dogs do need a pretty high level of maintenance, especially if you get a dog that's more active, needs more exercise, all of those kinds of things. And to be fair, I think some people do get dogs when they are not ready or capable or in the right headspace to take care of them. But if you're someone who's been looking for that externally enforced structure and accountability, on top of all of the love it can give you, I think dogs are a really, really great option. Now, on another not quite as financial note, we have number 4, Kelly Cutrone's memoir, If You Have to Cry, Go Outside. Now, the TFD historians in this chat will remember that we interviewed Kelly Cutrone in one of our earlier episodes of the Financial Confessions. It's still to this day one of my favorite episodes. We'll link you to that in the description so you can check it out. But I was beyond thrilled to have her on the show, not really because I was a fan of hers from the MTV The Hills days, although I do remember watching that and thinking that she came off as like quite villainous in the show, which I think was definitely what they were going for. I actually was mostly just a fan of her book, If You Have to Cry, Go Outside. Now listen, is it a controversial title? Absolutely. I would not necessarily say that today in 2024 that it would pass in quite the same way that it did when it was first published, but I found it to be a life-changing read for me personally. I first read it when I was just starting out as a business person, when I was just starting to rehab my finances and come into my own as a young adult woman. And kind of similarly to getting a dog, it felt really transformative in sort of the way that I looked at accountability and what I was capable of. It was the first time I had read a memoir by a woman that I found to be so unapologetic in the sort of 360 view of her as a person. It is, by turns, not very flattering to her. Like, she doesn't come across as a perfect or even great person throughout the entire thing. It's really, really honest. She talks about a lot of super personal experiences, things that are very traumatic, very vulnerable, and again, sometimes kind of unlikable. But I found that to be incredible because at the time I had only ever really seen men, and especially businessmen, who were able to have that kind of full range of humanity and didn't always need to be likable in order to be respected or to invest in themselves or to take themselves seriously. And I actually remember I read the book primarily at a park with what was at the time my new dog that I was like taking out and taking care of. And my dog had made me feel like, oh, I'm turning into a little grown woman here. Like I have something to take care of that depends on me. And I just remember reading the book and seeing the way that she related not only to her professional life, but also to her life choices, to the people who depended on her. And it was the first time that I had felt like, okay, there is maybe a version of being an adult woman. Now, I'm not here to say that I was trying to emulate her 100% or I would make all the same choices or anything like that, but that there was a way to own your imperfection without being ashamed of it or covering it in qualifiers. And she had such a radical sense of accountability towards herself and who she was that I found to be just frankly incredibly fascinating and really interesting to watch. And ever since then, I've really kind of been obsessed with like imperfect / unlikable protagonists and heroines, because I just think it is not something that we see enough in fiction or in nonfiction, and that there's always such a pressure on women to do things perfectly in order to talk about them or to put themselves out there. So Kelly Cutrone, If You Have to Cry, Go Outside, huge game changer for me. And the fact that that book came into my life and sort of that way of viewing things came into my life at the same time as the first thing I was like responsible for in my dog just felt like a very fortuitous time. Now, taking it back into my home, number 5 is my Dutch oven. Now, I know that this is probably not life-changing for some people in the way that they perceive it. Like I'm sure for some people, life-changing has like a much higher barrier to qualification. But for me, my Dutch oven, it's a like cast iron, large Dutch oven by the brand Stobe. I bought it years and years ago, almost a decade ago. It's one of the very first like true investment pieces that I got for my kitchen. It was several $100s. By now, the cost per use is like probably under a penny because I use it literally constantly. I use it for braising, making soups, pastas, deep frying. You can bake bread in it, which I don't, but my husband has. You can do so many things with it. But also, I just found that it was one of the first times that I had made an investment in wanting to do something more frequently, in this case, cooking more in my home, that it actually gave me a reason to lean into doing that. I think that often we tend to make the extravagant purchase for the thing that we want to do more of or be better at before we've put in the work to practice it, thinking that that purchase will encourage us to want to make up the difference by doing the thing. So for example, getting extremely expensive running shoes, even though you don't run, because you think it will make you want to train for a marathon and feel guilty if you don't, that almost never works, right? But if you have started to put in the effort to do something with subpar products or with just what you have around, and then you invest in the item that is going to make that easier or better, typically that is a much better way to make a purchase. So in the case of my Dutch oven, I had been using a really, really basic heavy bottomed pot that I had gotten from, I think like TJ Maxx when I first moved here. Nothing wrong with it. It was just a lot less nice, a lot less versatile than the Dutch oven. And after using that a ton, I upgraded, and it really did inspire me to want to cook more in the home, not only because I loved it as a piece, but because I felt proud of myself that I had really put in the work to prove to myself that I was someone who cooked at home frequently before I went ahead and invested in the piece. So it's not just something that has had a hugely beneficial cost per use. It's also something that in the way that I bought it and in the way that I decided to make that purchase really was the right way to frame how I make those purchases in my mind, and was one of the first times as a young adult that I had the patience to actually wait to make that investment when it was the right time. Similarly, number 6 is a language tutor. Now, I've talked about this a million times on the channel, but it's because it's one of the things I'm most passionate about in this life. I truly do believe that learning languages is just a transformative and in some ways almost radical human act. Not only do I think that it makes us just more thoughtful, worldly, interested, and interesting people. Like when I meet people who speak 6, 7 languages, like I'm like, I will pay just to be in your presence and soak up your atoms. Like, this is so cool. This is so interesting. Like, how did you learn them? Where did you go? Who did you meet? Who did you speak to? Like, it adds such a depth and richness to a person's life that I think even just purely on the surface, it's very cool. But I think especially in a world that is increasingly isolated, increasingly xenophobic, increasingly nationalist, there is something really powerful about taking a step out of your own linguistic comfort zone and learning someone else's way of viewing the world. There's tons of really interesting research that people who speak different languages actually think differently, they perceive reality differently, they experience emotion differently. And so getting to relate to other people in that way is a profound thing. Also, being a native English speaker for us Americans, Canadians, English people, British people, school, whatever the case may be. We are so used to the world being defaulted to us, to English being sort of like the general language of world travel, of tourism, of, business and commerce. We're used to being accommodated to. So we don't often have to experience the struggle and embarrassment of having to be not very good at communicating, which I think also is very beneficial because it really teaches us as adults to overcome that fear of not automatically being good at something, which is something that adults really just tend to avoid out of habit. But lastly, there's also incredibly good research at how transformative language learning throughout life can be to the human brain, particularly for staving off things like dementia and just keeping us more mentally and intellectually flexible as we age. So those are some of my biggest reasons for being hugely passionate about language learning. But I will say, as someone who decided, because I had only spoken English and then spoken French from a young age, so neither of those were, I don't even remember when I started learning French, so I didn't really have to kind of go through it as an adult. But when I decided to learn Spanish a few years ago as an adult, I made the investment to work with a tutor, which was a total game changer, right? Because it allowed me to not only sort of practice in a very sort of native, natural way with a native speaker, and she was also a woman my age, so I could really kind of speak to her in a fun, friend-like way and relate to her. It also allowed me, through that investment, similar to the purchase that I was talking about before, want to make good use of it. Because unlike some of the apps or more sort of passive ways of learning language, which I find can often be easy to sort of pick up or put down depending on what mood you're in. When you have another human being in front of you, there is a sense of accountability and a sense of investment. And it made it so much easier to then travel to countries where I was immersed in Spanish, go to Spanish language meetup groups or activities, and just generally feel much more at ease when I was in a situation where it was not just about understanding, but about speaking extemporaneously. So if you have ever been interested in learning a language as an adult, not only do I encourage you beyond all measure, and by the way, this is not to say that apps aren't good. I have also used Duolingo and things like that for countless hours. I've used Rosetta Stone. I've used name a language app. I've probably used it. I just think that also a language tutor can be a game-changing investment for so many reasons. And when it comes to external accountability, number 7 for me is a financial advisor. Now, I am not going to spend too much time on this because we talked about it in the intro and I've mentioned it in each video, but I started working with a financial advisor several years ago, and it has genuinely really helped not only my investment strategy, but also just kind of understanding the way that money fits into my bigger life goals. I am at a place now where I am a higher earner. I have my own business. I actually have multiple businesses. I have multiple sources of income. I live in a dual income household. We don't have children, but we do have other things we want to allocate for, other family members, people in our lives that we want to help provide for, and other things that we want to accomplish. We maybe don't want to wait until official retirement age to retire. We would maybe want to live somewhere else or own a different piece of property throughout our lives. There are a lot of things that we want to do. And it's just really interesting to be able to sit down with someone who is kind of a neutral third party who can look at everything and say, hey, listen, if this is what you want to do in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, this is how I would recommend going about it. This is what I think you could be doing better. And also kind of walks through all of the different, risks and benefits associated with a given financial strategy. Because especially as you get beyond the very basics of financial health, like having your emergency fund, putting money into your retirement account, etc., there are a lot of different options for how you can manage things like your investments, allocate your portfolio, etc. And they can have hugely different impacts on, the short, medium, and long term of your financial goals. So working with an advisor has been a game changer for me. You do have the link down below if you want to work with one. Number 8 is going to be community college. Now, I paid a few $1,000s to go to community college back in, I think 2008 is when I started going. I ended up going for 2 years. I did not finish my associate's degree, but I am still so of all of the mistakes that I made in my life, financially and otherwise, and all the trouble that I got myself into, the one thing that I'm so grateful that I never did was go to university. That would have put me in a lot of debt. And I actually did get accepted to several universities out of community college that I desperately wanted to go to. My parents would not co-sign on the loans, which looking back, I mean, at the time I was ready to burn their house down. But looking back, I would have been somewhere between $110,000 and $260,000 in debt from those educations, depending on where I would have gone and what I would have studied. Now, I was only applying to like private schools in Washington, D.C. and New York. So I don't know what I was thinking, but yeah, like I was like, why can't I go get a degree in international relations from George Washington University with only $5,000 of merit-based scholarship for a $60,000 annual tuition? Like, at the time, that seemed like a solid plan, but I do understand looking back why it probably wasn't. But either way, a lot of people hate on community college, and I understand why, because so much of what keeps the for-profit higher education industrial complex afloat is the perception of education only being really valuable when you're paying for it or you're paying a lot of money for it, and that anything that is accessible or open access is inherently lesser. But as I've gotten older, I have become more and more convinced that education, self-improvement, learning skills is, first of all, not just a question of college. It is something that should be happening throughout your life, regardless of what stage of life you're in. And secondly, it is so much less about where you're going and so much more about what you are putting into it. First of all, not only are an enormous amount of Ivy League level classes available at all times, literally for free on the internet right now, but also there are plenty of people who go to very prestigious institutions and kind of just dick around and don't really get anything out of it. For me, I enjoyed the hell out of community college. I was like super active in tons of student groups. I was the Rachel Berry of our theater department for sure. I had a lot of great friends. I made really lifelong memories, and I really, really enjoyed my classes. I got good grades, and I just loved showing up every day. I went to Anne Arundel Community College, shout out, which is actually a very good community college as far as they are ranked. But in general, I think learning to embrace what accessible education can do for you and learning that education is entirely about what you put into it is such a game-changing mind shift, especially in a world where education is so closely tied up with mountains of debt, which are not necessary. Sometimes can be very beneficial, but first of all, are not a one-way ticket to financial success, and B, can be extremely not worth it if you are not ready to actually put in the work necessary, which many of us are simply not at 18 or 19 years old. So shout out community college. I loved it. Honestly, I might mess around and go back to community college because I'm gonna start learning another language now that I'm pretty much, I consider myself mostly done with Spanish. And yeah, I don't know, watch out, Manhattan community colleges, because you might have a new student soon. Number 9 is not just one purchase, but an ongoing purchase, which is things like tailors, cobblers, upholstery repair, etc. Basically anything that is about maintaining, improving, repairing what you already have rather than buying something new. Now, as we covered in our October video essay, especially in our generation, millennials and Gen Z behind me, there is an enormous problem with treating things as disposable, even when they are not intended or don't need to be. For example, in many cases, you reach the end of a winter with a pair of boots, they're looking a little beat up, they're a little worse for wear. In the world that we've grown up in and the way that we are marketed to, often the logical next step would be get a new pair of boots. But for not only many generations prior to us, but also with many of the current products we have, the better and more sustainable answer would be get that boot resold and repaired and it will be good as new next year. Now, often that does mean having to invest in a higher quality piece to begin with, which is why, especially for things like leather goods, for example, it can often be much better to shop secondhand. But let me tell you, there is not a single pair of boots in my closet that hasn't been resold or repaired at least once, and I have kept them all for years. I actually have one I'm about to take to the cobbler this weekend. But similarly, as we've discussed before, doing things like buying jeans a size up and then getting them tailored to fit you properly, having small repairs made on things like outerwear at the end of a season, repairing or even reupholstering a piece of furniture, especially if it's one that you maybe got at a flea market or secondhand, or even found on the street, as has happened to me in the past. Essentially, the life-changing aspect of these purchases for me is to reframe my thinking about the items I have as how can I extend their lifespan and continue to get more joy and use out of them, rather than how can I replace them, which, just like waiting until you have proven to yourself that it is an appropriate time to make an investment purchase, is a huge game changer when it comes to how we are taught to spend money. Next up, and there's really not much to say about this, it's very much a if you know type thing, Accutane. Now, I am a former cystic acne queen. When I tell you that like still to this day at 35 years old, I regularly have nightmares about like horrible moments from my youth where I would be made fun of for my cystic acne. Like if you've ever experienced severe dermatological issues, like you get it, we get it. And I had cycled through so many different things that did not meaningfully help my skin. Accutane was an absolute game changer. The question Accutane asks us is, I will give you better skin at what cost? And you have to be ready to say basically at any cost, because it has so many side effects and is not for the faint of heart. But if you are in that place with your skin, it was a complete game changer for me. And kind of the more general point in terms of what I took away from it is like, you can try as much as you want for as long as you want with all of these sort of over-the-counter miracle products or things that purport to have all of these incredible benefits but are not maybe necessarily clinically reviewed or are not adapted to your actual medical needs, because lest we forget, skin is not just an organ, it is the biggest organ in your body. You can waste a lot of time on that wild goose chase before you find the thing that actually does help you. And for me, Accutane was a major game changer. And although my skin today is still very far from perfect and I struggle with all kinds of skin issues and probably will for my whole life, because I take after one side of my family that has just like not good skin as a rule. That was a huge game changer because cystic acne is no joke and used to make my life miserable. And now, although it is still a concern, I don't feel like my entire mental health and day-to-day life is based on how good my skin looks in a given morning. And staying on the topic of bodies, a Pilates instructor. Now, kind of similarly to how a language tutor can be incredibly helpful for getting you that level of confidence and immersion so that when you do go to less expensive, more open language experiences like meetup groups or group classes, or in some cases actual immersion, you feel more prepared and you feel like you can get more out of the experience. For me, doing some instruction with an actual instructor one-on-one before I went into a group class was an absolute game changer. I have been to an uncountable number of group exercise classes in my life. And I have had experiences with instructors, particularly in Pilates, that are not accommodating, that are very hard to follow, that don't necessarily make adjustments or make things easy to understand, that aren't super welcoming to beginners. And I do want to say that things like inclusion and being accessible to beginners if it's a beginner class is a systemic issue within the larger sort of like hot girl workout industrial complex, and Pilates is definitely no exception to that. But even classes that can be more accessible, I do think for certain workouts, and I think things like strength training also often fall into this category, you get so much more out of it if you go into the class prepared to actually understand what you're doing, to have some proper form, to feel confident in some of the basic moves, and to feel like you can follow along without just being super self-conscious that you don't even know the absolute basics. So investing in several sessions with a one-on-one Pilates instructor before I started going into group classes essentially meant that I was able to turbocharge those classes and feel super confident progressing in that much less expensive environment. And for reference, when I started going to classes, like although some Pilates classes, especially reformer classes, can be quite expensive, I went to group mat classes, which were about $15 per class, which here in New York City is very low, very accessible price point. And I don't think I would have gotten a fraction out of those classes or gotten as into Pilates as I eventually did if I didn't start from that position of comfort and confidence. Again, especially with things like, for example, strength training, where there is a real risk of hurting yourself if you don't know what you're doing, investing in that instruction, I think, is hugely game-changing. And next up, in terms of rethinking how we look at the things we buy and the way in which we're marketed to, is secondhand furniture. Now, I have so much secondhand stuff in my home now, like just literally in the shot that you're looking at, like this table, several pieces of artwork behind me. Well, this slipcover was made, but I guess technically is kind of secondhand. Like, the coffee table that my phone is on, like literally so much around me right now as I look around this room is secondhand, which is not revolutionary. And I'm sure many people have already shopped that way, but I've thought about this a lot, and I will actually throw it to a TikTok from myself on this subject.
I don't care if it's $14. I will pay you $14 not to buy this lamp, okay?
First of all, she's right. Second of all, there are so many comments on that video being like, but we're poor, we can only afford a $14 lamp. Let me just say this from my soul as someone who also used to only be able to afford a $14 lamp and thought that that meant I had to buy IKEA lamps, and did. We are in a golden age of buying secondhand, and especially for home goods, like the amount of stuff that you can get that is higher quality, better looking, more original, and often less expensive than IKEA, if not free, is insane. Like, I obviously have a much higher budget for lamps now, but I frequently still will only buy lamps for like $14 because I'm getting them off of places like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, flea markets, vintage stores, etc. I shop online estate sales like Everything But the House or live auctioneers, and sometimes I'll just find stuff put out on people's stoops. Anyway, I know some people are skittish about buying secondhand because of bed bugs or whatever, but please grow up. It's a lamp. We are so often in the framework of buy new, buy conveniently, buy instantly, and we will be talking about this in our next video essay. We're often in the mindset that if we have a small amount of money with which to purchase something, then what we should do is find the cheapest possible new item, which in the case of things like furniture will often leave us going to places like IKEA, Amazon, etc. And here's the thing, IKEA does have some cool pieces, and sometimes you have a specific need and you need to find something. They have cool all wood items. They do have some higher quality stuff, and a lot of their stuff can be durable and last the test of time. But a lot of times when we're buying an item of furniture, it's first of all not like clothes where there are so many more considerations about fitting on the human body. Like, we're literally talking about things like a table, a chair, a lamp, where there is so much more flexibility and versatility into how it can fit into a space, and you don't need to be the exact same size as the person who owned it before you. Also, these are often materials that are literally made to last decades, things like wood, metal, stone, etc. But in a lot of cases, when it comes to home items, it literally is not that urgent. Like, you can wait a little bit longer, look at yard sales, thrift stores, online estate sales, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, etc., to find the right item if you're willing to be a bit more patient and creative. And as I say in my TikTok, it often ends up looking infinitely better, more original, more unique, with more personality if you wait to source the right piece. The last life-changing purchase that I've made is the home that I am filming this in. Now, I have a whole video on my purchase of my home that breaks down how I found it, exactly what I paid for it, the mortgage rate that I got, all the factors that went into buying it from a financial perspective, which we will also link you to. But I want to say that aside from all of the sort of emotional / aesthetic benefits of owning a home, which for me have been big, I'm really into my space. I've done several renovations here. It's really cool to know that this is my space that I own and can do with what I want. For us, the purchase of our home was a really good financial decision for a lot of reasons. We were able to lock in a great price because it was depressed by COVID in New York City. We were able to get an amazing mortgage rate that we'll probably never get again. I don't think we'll ever get a mortgage rate of 2.875 30-year fixed again, like, bye. And it was really right for our lifestyle. It was just, the stars really aligned to make it a very positive financial choice. And I want to stress that we were not necessarily planning to buy a home at that time. It just happened to be that it was a really good time to buy if you were looking to buy in the city of New York, which does go to show that the point should not be to buy at any cost, no matter what the situation is. It should be wanting to buy when the situation is right to make it a good financial decision. So anyone who's shaming you about renting when it's not necessarily a better financial decision in your given area or desired area to purchase at that time, they can shut it, because renting is just as valid. It totally depends on what is the right life and financial choice for you at that time. But I also went about looking for the right place like pretty methodically. I was really targeted in my search and approach, and was able to find a really, really good deal that really fit our lifestyle and financial goals. And honestly, when I had purchased it, it was still at a time when, like, for example, some of my previous financial mistakes were still on my credit report, and I was still very much kind of viewing myself as someone who was getting better with money and not necessarily fully good with money, and navigating us through that decision. My husband wasn't even living in the country at the time due to immigration issues. So I really navigated us through that. Like, I led that process. I identified the asset and I sort of made it happen. It was just life-changing because I felt so proud of myself, and I felt very capable, and I felt like it was a real step up in my own financial capabilities. Anyway, as I said in the intro, your life-changing financial purchases are likely to be very different from mine. And again, I'd love to hear some of what they are in the comments. But overall, the point is to look back at the way you've spent over the years and to think about the purchases that have really been worth it in the long term, not just in terms of cost per use, but in terms of impact that they've had on you as a person. Anyway, I'll see you back here next week for the rest of our series, The Grown Woman's Guide to Life. Bye all.